Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Witch Mama podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Laura West. So, Laura is a registered nurse, an energy healer, a psychic medium, an author, a podcast host, and a TV host who is dedicated to both the sciences and spirituality. So, she was the host of Life from the Other Side on the Everyday Woman TV network. And she currently hosts her own podcast called A Guided Life. She's dedicated to spreading the word of love and teaching others how to communicate with their spirit guides using their intuition. So I'm super excited to have Laura with me here today. Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk and share.
Yes, for sure. So I want to dive right in. Can you tell the audience, how did you get into mediumship? When you're in your intro, you talked about combining science and spirituality. So I'm really intrigued how you found mediumship in your life in particular.
So, ever since I was younger, I just always had a curious mind, and it was really hard for me, at least in hindsight, to just sort of blindly follow anything as far as a religion or a spirituality that didn't resonate with me internally. So I was brought up in both a Christian and Jewish household, which means that my parents were very much open to whichever direction I chose to go. And I went the spiritual route, and I'm so blessed that they still very much support me in what I do, along with my husband and my kids, of course. But back then, as a child, that was really important because I think it helped to set that foundation. Well, I also have a very analytical brain as well. And so I got into nursing because I was very much interested in biology and human anatomy, and then the power of healing and being able to help people. So there was also that component as well of that, I don't know, that not humanitarian, but that component where you want to help people, make them feel better, but also utilize what science has available to do that. So it felt only natural for me to start to incorporate some of the things that I'm interested in when it comes to spirituality and science, because I feel like there is a connection. I feel like one happens because of the other, and vice versa. So I still very much, when I have conversations with people about spirituality, I want to know, like, what do you think the mechanism is behind that? Like, why do you think that works that way? And blah, 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 blah. So I very much still incorporate a lot of that in my practice. I was always interested in anything mediumship related and mystical related from an early age. When I first learned about spirit guides, it was so fascinating to me. I was in my early 20s at the time, and I was like, what is this about? Like, this like speaks to me. I want to meet my guides, and how does this work, and what do they do, and what how do they become a guide, and like all these questions that I even still have to this day. So I loved watching the mediumship shows of like John Edward back then. I think he was the sort of the bigger one. Sylvia Brown, I loved anything related to her. She was really big in my spiritual beginnings as well. And so I also had these experiences growing up where I would get dream visitations of people who had passed. Or I would, that was how I met my spirit guides. So my dreams were really paramount too in how I progressed spiritually as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I still wanted to be in the medical field. So I went into nursing. And once I was sort of established in that and had been working for several years already, the spiritual component started to peek its head back into my life. Because before that, I had a spiritual awakening in my early 20s. And then I went to school, got married, got the house, the kids, all that stuff. Still was working during that time as a nurse. And then the spiritual stuff started to come in because I started meditating for the first time in 2019. And so it was a sort of, it became a very natural but quick progression
Hmm.
of still working as a nurse and living my human life as like mom and everything, right? And wife and all that good stuff. But then also starting to hone in on my intuition and start to want to explore that side that really resonated with me of connecting with entities on the other side and seeing where that went. And then incorporating things like energy healing and then having conversations about stuff like that now on my podcast as well with other people. So that's kind of how that transpired in a nutshell.
I love all that. Yes. So that's a kind of a good transition point because I was going to dive into sort of why is it even important for us to tune into our intuition? Like we hear that a lot, right? And I talk about it a lot on my podcast and my business as well. But for someone that's like a total beginner, say they're listening to this and they're like, what are they even talking about? Like, why is that important for us to do? And how, I guess, is there a particular way you like tuning in that really helps you get connected?
Sure. So, first of all, I think that it's important, and not just one's spiritual practice. Yeah, it plays a huge role in that, but it's important just for the day-to-day, everyday living. And I think that even though people may be newer to the notion of intuition, or the becoming aware of it, we are all very intuitive. Or, well, we're all intuitive. Some more than others, but we're all intuitive because we all will say, "Oh, I just had a bad feeling about this or that," or you know what, that person just I just it does some about them doesn't sit right. So we're already using and working with our intuition already. So, but for those who are maybe wanting to utilize it more on a spiritual path when it comes to connecting with entities on the other side, for instance, because that's where my passion lies,
Hmm.
it helps to use that same gauge or meter that we were using before when we said, "Oh, you know what? I just something about that person doesn't feel right. Something about this place doesn't feel good." Or, I just didn't really want to do that today, or, whatever the case may be. So it's that same meter that we were using before to tune in with our soul team members, so like angels, spirit guides, past loved ones, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, so it's just the answers might be a bit different, or the outcome of that intuitive hit might be a bit different. Whereas before, if you're in a place that just doesn't feel right, you may be like, okay, I think I'm just going to leave. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know what it is, doesn't feel right.
Hmm.
But when you're in a place where you're tuned in and using your intuition to connect to entities who are on the other side, whether it's your spirit guides helping you to navigate life, then it might feel more like I'm just getting this hit that I need to not be here right now.
Yeah.
Maybe my guide's telling me, or I can sense it. My grandmother who passed is telling me. So it just changes the language a little bit. Does
Hmm.
it change the connection or the intuitive hit or where it comes from and all that stuff? No, it's just how we perceive it and how we then interpret that. So
Hmm.
that would maybe be the transitional difference between somebody who is like, whoa, like my intuition can do that. I didn't even know, like I have to intuition. Yes, you have intuition. But when you start to use it with connecting with the other side, it just may have a different outcome. So for instance, say Kelly, you asked me a question like, what does my guide want me to know today? And so for me, I would that same feeling where I would get in my gut, like, where something doesn't feel good. I kind of tune in the same way. It's so hard to explain unless you've done this. So I'm
Yes.
trying really hard to put this into words.
Yeah.
But I would then tune into your guides. I keep going like here because guides for me are like always over here.
Yeah.
So I would tune into your guides and, ask, okay, in my mind, what does Kelly need to know today? And I just, whatever comes in, like whatever I just feel like saying. And it's like intuitively, I'll just say, just keep going. You're doing a great job, encouragement, all that good stuff. Saw the word spirit and then the word sprint. I'm like, I don't know. So whatever that means to you, but that's just the stuff that would like come in for you. So, um, now the one thing that I do like to share when I first started to learn to hone in on my intuition, even though I had been intuitive my whole life, but in
Mhm.
2019 I started to meditate. So that would be one way that I would encourage somebody who wants to hone in on their intuition would be to meditate, and I'll explain why I think it works in a second.
Mhm.
But I do want to share that before I started wanting to hone in on my intuition, it was because I wanted to know better what it felt like when I wasn't supposed to do something. So my interpretation of intuition before I realized all the other amazing things it means is that it's there to keep us from doing something we're not supposed to. Because you always hear about the stories of I turned left when I normally don't, and I realize I missed a car accident, or
Mhm.
like gosh, I really feel like I should be doing this, but for some reason I feel a lot of pressure to do it, like from my friends, so I'm going to do it, but just I really don't feel like this is going to be bad. So I always thought that our intuition was there to keep us from doing something bad, which it is. But it's
Yeah.
also there to help guide us to do good as well if we want to use good and bad. So yes, so meditation would be one way that it worked really well for me. I had no idea that that was going to be the outcome of it, but it worked really well for me because when you want to start to use your intuition more as communication with spirit or whatever entities on the other side, loving entities on the other side. You need to start to listen more, feel more, visualize more, and to help with that, it helps to be able to focus on what's meant to come in. And so meditation is a good way to train the brain to be able to focus and to get rid of the clutter. So if for somebody listening, they feel intuitively guided to do like psychic mediumship work, but they don't know where to start, for instance, or they're like, how do I communicate better with spirit? Intuition is huge because you can't be connecting with spirit and then worry about all the things you've got to do today. Like your goal right there as the psychic medium is to be the messenger and to be as clear of a messenger as you can for the spirits and then for your sitter or client who's in front of you. So to be able to do that, you can't be doing anything else mentally.
Yeah.
So, the meditation really helps because it helps you to like focus your breathing and just a good training practice. I keep going like this. I don't know. I like to gesticulate, but it just, anyway. So that's what I would recommend. The best place to start would be meditation and not meditations where it's guiding you to listen to your intuition. You could throw those in, but the ones that have you just really practice focusing on your breathing, quieting your mind. If the thoughts come in, you release them. That kind of meditation I find worked really well for me. Of course, everybody's different. You could try it. If it doesn't work for you, fine. But for those who haven't tried it yet, I would strongly urge to do the ones where they just want you to really sit your quietness,
Mhm.
because those ones will really help with the training.
Absolutely, yeah. And I love everything you said. And so for me, I always get the questions from people when they're like, I'm trying to listen to my intuition, I'm trying to tune in to my intuition, but they're like, I don't know if I'm like making this up. I've got that question like at least 3 to 5 times in the past 2 weeks from clients or just people I'm talking to. And I just smile because that like it is at the beginning of your journey, like it for me that was like that as well. Like I was like, am I just creating these things, or is it a spirit guide, or is it this, or is it that? So for them to ask that question is totally legit. But what I say is that it just takes like it takes time, but it takes trust, right? Self-trust that you are actually getting those messages from your spirit guides, angels, ancestors, beings of light, so that those are actually messages coming through and not some story you're making up in your head. I'm sure you've gotten that question a lot too.
Yeah. I mean, I still ask myself that question. Yeah, definitely. But you know what's really helped with that is the practice of doing readings and getting validation, right? That's what really helps. Because otherwise, if you can't really validate it, there's no way to measure and to give, that confirmation that it is indeed spirit and not you because and because it's like in the same place in your brain.
Mhm.
It feels the same as if you're daydreaming or imagining something. It's like this, they access that same place in your mind to give you the messages. So it's very, very common to question and wonder if it is me making it up or am I really getting messages through. And really, the best way is just validating and trusting, like you said, and just say it. Like if it feels very weird and far-fetched, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna say like a purple horse. I don't know why they're showing me a purple horse, and then the sitter's gonna be like, oh my gosh, like that's their sign for me. That's the only way to know. Okay, I remember what that felt like. I remember how that came to me, whether you're visual or you hear it or you feel it or whatever. But you remember what that's like, and you just keep practicing and building on that. It's really that's the best way to do it is to bite the bullet and even though it's scary, start doing readings for people to get that validation.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that as well. So yeah, I do readings. I do not do mediumship readings. It is something I might be interested in the future,
Mm.
but I do intuitive readings and Akashic records.
So
Um,
very similar.
Very similar, yeah. So both of those, yes, I tell people just to go in as open as possible, and I do get visuals, I get messages, I get flashes of past lives coming through for people. And I really had to really work on my confidence and trust in sharing those, right? Because at first it was very scary, like, oh, what if they say this makes no sense at all? And then they're like, no, that's not
Yep.
what it is. But you're right. As you practice it again and again, as you do more and more, and you get those confirmations and you get the clients coming back and saying how meaningful and impactful it was for
Mhm.
them and how it allowed them to open something up and it allowed them to like take a step forward in their life or like in some way be beneficial. That's when it all starts kind of like you gain that self-confidence then along your path. So
Yeah, it's scary, but it's the best way.
definitely, yes. So there was something you mentioned at the beginning that I was intrigued by. So I'd
Mm.
like to dive into it a little bit. You had said something about how does a guide become a guide? How does a spirit guide become a spirit guide? So I'd like to dive into that a little bit because I'm just intrigued by it, and I think the audience would be too. Because we hear so often, like we are getting these messages from our spirit guides, but some people are confused who they even are. So I guess two parts to the question. How does a guide become a guide? And then how can people actually find out like who their guide is?
Great questions. Okay. So, a guide, first of all, has lived lives on Earth or in the physical, I should say, because there are other planets, have lived lives in the physical. So that's important because it allows them to empathize with their human that they're guiding. Now, who is a spirit guide? Well, the term to me is pretty general. So anyone that's a spirit and that guides you to me is a spirit guide because I have learned time and time again that you can't give limiting definitions or explanations on anything spirit related because you will then be thrown a curveball and shown differently. Like, oh, I had no idea that was possible.
Mhm.
Like, I have done readings for people and have learned that your guide could be living in the same life as you in the physical, and then you'll switch off being each other's guides as well. So, I mean, I've learned so many different things. Plus, I've read different books about it as well. So, there's just it's very limitless, and it's also very personal, I think, too.
Mhm.
Because for some people, they will say, my grandmother who passed in this lifetime feels like a guide to me. And that's totally acceptable. Whereas
Mhm.
maybe an older, quote unquote, older definition of spirit guide would have been more like, no, it's separate from a past loved one. But to me, I feel like it's just a name we give it because we need it. But energy is energy, and they're there to help us no matter what. So a guide just like us will spark. Do they just spark from source's energy like we did?
Mhm.
Some sparked before we did, so they're able to guide us through. We all have multiple guides. I do like to say that we each have one, maybe two main guides. You have two. I really feel like you have two
Yeah.
main, quote unquote, main guides that are there with you. Like they were there from the beginning and they're there through every life. Some lives they may play a bigger role than others, just depending on what you need for that life. And then we've got other guides as well that will help us through both physical things and emotional things. So if you're back at school, you've got a guide that's going to help you with the school stuff. If you are going through a bout of depression, you've got a guide that helps you through that. And then the good stuff too, like if there's something really worth celebrating, I'd venture to say all your guides are going to be a part of that because that's just a happy moment. But just know that we've got guides for all sorts of things. How do you know who to talk to, and what to call them and all this stuff? Um, it's okay if you don't know, because they're just going to be there for you no matter what. But if you are like me and you're like, oh, I want to know exactly who it is, what their names are, what do they do for me? Like, if you really want to know that stuff, I totally get it. It's very much like a human thing that we need. And I have found that guides are very much happy to give that to us if
Yeah.
we ask. So, a good way that goes back to trusting your intuition to maybe find out the name, for instance, of one of your guides, or if you want to kind of see about your quote unquote main guide, is to just ask. You just ask, you know, guide, what is your name? And either a name will pop into your mind, and that's when it's important to trust your intuition and go with that. And it's okay if that's the, I don't know, right name or not. I don't really think it would be a wrong name, but it's fine because the name's for us. Another way that I have that worked for me was I asked my guide to visit me in my dreams. And
Mhm.
I was so lucky that I remembered to ask his name in the dream. So he told me directly through my dream that his name's Jason. So that's how I know his name. Another good way too is maybe when you're a little bit further along in your intuitive journey and you pick up on signs and synchronicities, maybe you're starting to hear a name that you just haven't heard a long time, and all of a sudden you're hearing it over there. Like the name Sarah, for instance. Say you don't know any Sarahs. And then all of a sudden you're like overhearing on the TV show the name Sarah. You're like, you maybe don't think anything of it. And then maybe you hear your, I don't know, neighbor talking to someone on the phone. They're like, hey, Sarah, how's it going? You're like, okay, interesting. Sarah, I heard the name Sarah twice. That too is another way that spirit will start to be like, hey, like, this is the information you wanted. This is how I'm going to give it to you. So there are different ways to receive that information. It's just up to you how the human the person how they want to play around and see how their guide wants to give it to them. I think the probably the most the quickest way would just to be like ask what's your name and then see if a name pops in right away. That might be the quickest. And then it's just nice to have a name. Some people don't need a name. That's totally fine. But if
Yeah.
you're like me, I love a name.
Yeah, we love assigning order to things as humans, right?
Gives us a sense of control.
So funny. I was trying not to like laugh when you said Sarah because that was one of the first guides' names I ever found out in my journey. And it came through in a meditation. I was on a session with some group or something, and they were like guiding us through to figure out what your guide, like who your guide was. And that was Sarah came through for me. So you just said Sarah. So funny.
Sarah's here.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
hilarious. I love it. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, for sure. I just had to mention that because, especially, for the audience, like just us here talking it on Zoom, and that came to your intuition. And that was who I was thinking of at the time when you were talking about like naming our guides. So it's like we're all very connected.
Oh, yes. And I'm obviously very open right now.
Yeah, I love that so much.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, so what would you give the audience members as some tips if they are interested in pursuing mediumship more as a practice? And whether that is like individually, like just for themselves, or they want to build something like a business or build a practice to help other people.
Well, so first of all, some words of encouragement that if that's something that you as a listener are even interested in, to me means that you're on the right path and it's meant for you. Because there are people who are like, I do not need to speak to anybody on the other side. I am fine being with the people who I can see. So you're on the right track. So kudos. Secondly, this is where intuition comes in. It's important to go with what feels good as far as the direction you want to take for your training or practice. If you're like me and you do want to get some sort of direction, because I am always learning. We're all always learning, right? So very much open to whatever I can receive. But I was not willing to pay an arm and a leg for any sort of training. That's just me. Because I feel like my relationship with spirit is so personal
Yeah.
to pay a lot for me. Just it didn't intuitively feel right. So I found a lot of great courses online that were really helpful. Hay House has some that are really either inexpensive or free, and those worked really well for me. Also, there are a lot of great books out there that can be very helpful. Really though, the education part is good because it can give you some tools and it can teach you can learn from people who are already doing that work and rather successfully. So you can learn like maybe their techniques and see if it works for you, or maybe they have some other techniques to offer. You learn about things like creating this vocabulary or this dictionary with spirit. If they show you that means that. You learn how to maybe create that. So there's a lot of good things to get from certification courses or just courses. Do you
Mhm.
need to be certified? I mean, I don't know. That's personal, I think.
Yeah.
But from, courses. And then what really helped me was Facebook has this really great group. There's a couple of them or several of them out there now that I'm aware of where you can practice reading for people and it feels very safe because you're in a Facebook group, so you're not there in front of the person, and
Mhm.
you can take your time to sit without feeling somebody's watching you, like anticipating what you're going to say.
Yeah.
So there's really good development groups that I found in on Facebook. And what was great about those is that they have to provide feedback. And so you get the feedback of, okay, what you said resonated, or, you're way off, whatever, so that you can tweak and hopefully not become deflated and defeated and keep going on because that's easy to do too, right? So so that's why it's also nice to maybe practice that way as well. It worked well for me. But it's just such a personal journey as far as that goes. I found channel writing was also a really good way
Mm.
to segue into it as well, because I was learning to listen and hear my guides or whoever's guides I was channeling for and put it on paper. I was able to read what I wrote. And if there was something that was a bit of a premonition, I could go back and see if it came to fruition because it's in writing. So channel writing was nice because it got me feeling comfortable with connecting and communicating with guides was mostly who I channel wrote with. So yeah, there's just all these different ways to do it. I found that the classes that I took that were either free or really inexpensive worked just as well because it was meant to be my path and they gave good guidance and a lot of it is intuitive. So
Mhm.
however I feel good to learn and
I love
practice.
that advice. Yeah, that's so good because yeah, sometimes people feel pressured to enroll in the courses or the trainings and you're so right. It starts with your intuition. So leaning into that for yourself is really the most important. What I found is I not so much had to take trainings on intuition or like spirit guides, but just in some of the more advanced things as you go along your journey,
Sure.
as you just get deeper and deeper, and then you're like, oh, I'm interested in Akashic records, or I'm interested in this or that or this. And then you start to know, lean into that what feels good for you to sign up for, kind of.
Yeah, it's like a gateway.
Yes, an unlimited gateway.
It's so unlimited. It can be very overwhelming. That's why intuition's so important because
Yes.
without it, we'd be like, where do I even go next? There's so much to learn.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, there's just so much. There's so much.
It's a
Yes.
blessing, but ooh, it could be
Yes.
overwhelming.
Definitely. You can fill lifetimes up with all of the all of the knowledge that are
Always
out
learning.
for sure. So thank you so much. Where can people connect with you, follow you online, and find out more
Yeah.
about how to work with you if they're interested in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all that fun stuff, but I do have a link tree. So everything's just right there if they want to connect for a reading or if they want to buy a copy of my book or get to the podcast. Everything's in one place. So
Awesome.
it's just my link tree site. It's linktr.ee/guided west.
Awesome. And I will make sure to include that in the show notes as well so people can just easily click on over to that link and find you and all the amazing things that you're doing. And so thank you so much. I so appreciate you coming onto the podcast. I can probably talk for hours longer on all of these topics, but have to
Yeah.
cut it off at some point, right? For the recording purposes and all of that. So just thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. This was so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Yes, of course.